We are on chapter 19. We're ready to get rolling, and we are talking about fair housing. Now, there will be a few questions on fair housing on the exam. It's a very important chapter, and try to pick out some of the things you need to understand about fair housing and for the exam. First of all, there's a lot of definitions or a lot of legal laws that we talk about with fair housing, and we have the first law is called the Civil Rights Act of 1866. And I want to just try to break this down so that you can know how to pass the exam and also how to practice as a real estate professional, because it's very important. Discrimination is a big deal, and we don't want to do that ever. We want to treat everybody the same. And that's actually what this law of 1866 says, is all citizens shall have the same right to buy, sell, purchase real estate, whatever. All citizens, regardless of color or any, race or anything in that matter. Look at this though, 1866. What was happening in the 1950s and 60s, and even unfortunately happens today? Discrimination was a big deal. So what we need to know for this chapter is, first of all, there was a law in the books that goes all the way back to 1866, and I want you to write in your notes and make sure that you understand when it gets to race, you cannot discriminate based on this federal law from 1866. Now, there was a law that was enacted in 1968, and this law in 1968, it's the Title VIII Act of 1968, said you couldn't discriminate on race, color, religion, and national origin. Now, they added in I believe it was 74, that you couldn't discriminate based on sex. This was in 74. This is in 68. And then in 88, under George Bush, they added handicap, and they also added familial status. So, basically, some things you need to know is that there was this title, this is the Title VIII Act of 1968. They came up with this act back then, and they put some exclusions. You can see as we go through the notes that if you are an owner and you live in a 1 to 4 family unit, you could discriminate against someone of sex or some of these things because of these exclusions that were in this Title VIII Act of 1968. So, and we have that in the notes. So what happened was there was this case called Jones versus Mayer. You might see it on the exam, and it was from actually in Florissant, Missouri, just out of St. Louis. And the Joneses were an African-American couple who were suing Mr. Mayer, who was a builder. And they were trying to say that Mayer discriminated against them because of their race. And Mr. Jones said, if you look at this law, the Title VIII Act of 1968, it actually says if you don't sell so many homes in a number of years and you're not using a real estate broker, and some of these, I don't want to say loopholes, but they were exclusions, it's okay to discriminate, provided, that one of these little items, these items that are listed, and we've got those in your notes. I was trying to find where that, where we've got some of those notes that are in there. But anyway, what I want you to understand is Mr. Jones, or Mr. Mayer, the developer, said, I know they're suing me. They think I discriminated based on race, but you've got some of these exclusions that say if I follow these exclusions, it's okay for me to discriminate. Well, Mr. and Mrs. Jones' attorney said, Mr. Mayer, that's fine and dandy that there are these little loopholes or exclusions, exceptions, we might want to say exceptions to the law. And yes, you are right. You didn't use a real estate broker. You hadn't sold so many houses within 2 years. And you may think you have the right to discriminate since you followed all of these exceptions and you fall within that guideline. But if you go all the way back here to 1868, Mr. Mayor, there was a federal law in the books that said under no circumstances can you ever discriminate on race. And Jones is one. So this lawsuit, Jones versus Mayer, basically says you can't discriminate based on race in the sale or rental of any kind of real estate, period. Because there was already a federal law way back on the books. And even though we have this Title VIII Act of 1968, and there are some exclusions or exceptions, you know, if you own a 1 to 4 family unit and you live in one of the units, if you are not using a real estate broker, you know, some of these areas, you could say, I only rent to people, I only rent to men, or if it's a lady, she could say, I only rent to women. I'm living in this 1 to 4 family dwelling and I live in one of the units. It's okay for that discrimination to occur because she's following the Title VIII 1968 Act and she's following the exceptions. However, if she ever tried to discriminate, I'm talking about the lady that owns a 1 to 4 family dwelling, if she ever tried to discriminate against someone on race, you couldn't do that. So on the test, on the exam, they like to give you questions and you just have to kind of dig through there. And if they're saying they tried to discriminate against race, can you do that? No, not under the 1866 law. So, you know what Jones versus Mayer is. It's a court case that said you can't discriminate based on race, based on this 1866 law. You need to know familial status and handicap. Family status, believe it or not, if a person is pregnant and they've not even had the child, you couldn't discriminate against them. That's considered to be part of the family, which is in the law. Handicap or disability, it's more of a disability. If a person is in a drug rehabilitation program or an alcoholic rehabilitation program, that's a disability and you couldn't discriminate against them or refuse to rent to them because they are in that program. So, you'll kind of see the questions and they're not too very challenging or difficult. I think you'll do all right. Read the information, go over the test here. I would know these questions that we have. Blockbusting. Blockbusting, believe it or not, Jones versus Mayer came out of Florissant, Missouri, which is a suburb of St. Louis. Blockbusting started in St. Louis. And blockbusting is when real estate brokers would go into a neighborhood and they would, they also call it panic peddling. They would tell the people in the neighborhood that people of a certain racial makeup were getting ready to move into the neighborhood. They may want to put their home up for sale and sell their house. And so people would panic thinking, oh, the neighborhood's going to go down, we better sell our home. And so that is referred to as blockbusting, trying to induce neighbors to sell their property, panic peddling because of ethnic or racial makeups moving into the area. Steering is another term. You might see either one of these definitions. Steering is when a real estate agent tries to take someone of a certain nationality or race and steer them to a specific neighborhood. And they actually say steering is one of the items that happens more than anything in the real estate business. And it's not that we're trying to deliberately move people in a specific area, but I'm thinking of in St. Louis, we have a big Croatian population that's moved into the St. Louis area. Now, as a real estate agent, you might think if you're working with some folks from Croatia, oh, I know where all the other Croatians are tend to be living. Let's go show you properties in that subdivision or that area. That's a form of steering. You have to just say, what, you know, here are the houses that are available for sale, and I just have to show you everything that's out there. So they do like to have a question that says, a buyer asks you, they're from Germany or Japan or Asian descent, they want to look at properties where the other Asians live. What should you tell them? You should tell them, I can only show you everything that's out there. I have to show you everything that's out there. Don't put yourself in a steering position. Redlining, I think still even happens today. I saw a news program a few years ago in St. Louis. I hate to be picking on St. Louis, but the redlining, and we used to have this problem really in our little area, is let's say this is Elvins. This is all Park Hills now. This is River Mines. And this was Flat River, where I grew up. And this is 32. I want to tell you the prices were different in Flat River. They were different in River Mines, and they were a lot different in Elvins. In fact, back in the day when I was selling properties, this was a tough sell, unless you grew up in Elvins. I went to school in Elvins. Nothing wrong with the community. It's a great little area. I own real estate in Elvins today, to this day, or this part of Park Hills. These towns all consolidated. Now it's called Park Hills. But redlining, and I think this happened back then to Elvins, is when a lending institution would say, we do not want to make loans in this area because it's a high-risk area. So they would make all kinds of loans over here in Flat River, and maybe one or so here in River Mines, but zero in Elvins. And that's redlining. Banks cannot do that. They cannot take an area and say, let's don't make loans in here because we think it's a high-risk area based on the makeup of the residents or whatever. So redlining, banks and savings and loans deny applications of certain particular areas. Insurance companies cannot be guilty of redlining either. And then we have the American Disabilities Act, the ADA. It provides Americans with disabilities the right to enjoy as others do. There are some questions on the test you may see regarding ADA. One question in particular that I remember seeing is, what would a tenant not have to put back if they rented an apartment? And one of the questions is, make the doorway smaller. You know, they widen the doorway. In other words, you wouldn't have to make them put the doorway back to a smaller width because that wouldn't really hurt anything. But if they removed carpeting, they'd have to put that back. If they lowered the kitchen cabinets, they would have to put those back up. You know, general cosmetic things like that, or general items like that, they would have to put back the way they found it. But you know, something like widening a doorway would not be required for them to go back and fix. And I think that's the answer for the test. So you might see a question regarding ADA. Keep in mind that you know, you can't discriminate on family or the size of the family, people with disabilities. You can have a senior citizen complex where you can discriminate as long as everyone's over 55, and the policy is to not let anyone under the age of 55 live in there, and that they follow all of those rules religiously, that would be okay. But just understand it's very important. Remember that fair housing laws are enforced through HUD, H-U-D, Housing and Urban Development, Housing and Urban Development. And remember that you don't have, this is the thing about fair housing that you need to understand as a real estate professional. First of all, I believe wholeheartedly we need to treat everybody equally and the same. I just think that's vital. I think that's why I've been in real estate 39 years and I've seen a lot of other people come and go. Not saying that they discriminated, but I've always tried to treat everybody the same and be fair to everybody. But they don't have to prove that you intentionally discriminated. They just have to say, hey, discrimination occurred. So if you have someone come in who's white and you're white and you offer them coffee and get them both coffee, and then you have someone come in who's of an Asian background or an African American and you do not offer them coffee, that could be construed as discrimination. So you've got to treat everybody the same. People come into your office and you offer coffee to one, offer it to everybody. Watch those types of things. Don't ever be different just because of someone's racial background or their ethic, not ethics, but their, I think you understand, but ethnic background. Thank you from one of my students who's in that classroom right here. Ethnic background. Treat everybody the same. Very, very important, and I think you should do that. You'll see some questions. I mean, why wouldn't they want to test you on fair housing? It's very important that you know that and that you follow fair housing laws. So I would definitely go through those questions, go through those flashcards, know the definitions, and then remember that the law of 1866, Civil Rights Act of 1866 says what? All citizens shall have the same right, and you cannot discriminate for any reason based on race, okay? So, good job on this. We're going to move on over to chapter 20.